Today, Mark continues on with the theme of bread. Earlier, Jesus had multiplied just a few loaves to feed 5,000. Then the Pharisees were upset that the disciples didn't wash their hands in the ritual way before eating their bread. Now a woman comes to Jesus because her daughter has a demon, and Jesus talks to her again about bread. He says the bread is for the children first. Now, there's no getting around the fact that this story is bothersome to us. It's a stumbling block, and in fact, it's caused problems for Christians for years. But let's read it, and let's see what the fuss is about. And before we do, I'd like to ask you to give this video a thumbs up, like it, subscribe, hit the notifications so that you can keep up with all of our studies as we go through the book of Mark. All right, let's read. We're reading Mark 7, verses 24 through 30. It says, Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Lord, she replied, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon had gone. Now, there's no getting around the uncomfortable nature of this story. Many have tried to write off the offense, implying that maybe when Jesus called this lady and her child dogs, he did so with a hint of a smile or a twinkle in his eye to let her know that he wasn't serious. Now, the problem is that Mark doesn't give us any indication at all of that being the case. On the contrary, Mark lets the insult sting like a slap across the face. He makes no effort to pull the punch. This leads to the conclusion that we should assume that Jesus meant what he said, and he said it on purpose. Oh, but today we are offended by offense. You know, it's kind of ironic that, right, the most binge-worthy TV series can be filled with all kinds of lewdness and gore, and we don't even blush. But to offend someone, oh, that's beyond the pale, right? There's no getting around it in this story. Jesus' words to this woman are offensive by our standards. You know, at least they offend us. And I wouldn't be surprised if people were to turn away from Jesus because of this story, or use this story as an excuse to turn away from Jesus. So, once again, the person of Jesus, who he is a stumbling block to people. He's a stumbling block that Jesus and Mark make no effort to move aside. We're left to wrestle with a stumbling block Messiah. So what do we do if Jesus doesn't behave the way we expect him to? What if he doesn't conform to our standards and expectations? In this story, Jesus really messes with our modern sensibilities, standards, and expectations. We always hear about Jesus being this nice guy that everybody liked, and we imagine that he was always polite and happy. There's no getting around it in this story. Where this woman, she's a Greek, Syrian, Phoenician woman, she comes to him and asks about help for her daughter who's demon-possessed, and Jesus just dismisses her rudely. He comes off totally as rude and unsympathetic. And even worse, this story can bring upon Jesus the accusation of the worst of all possible offenses, racism. So what do we do with this? How do we handle this? Again, Mark is not bothered by this at all. He writes it down for the church. He doesn't try to explain it away. This is a story that the church is supposed to know. And what's more, the woman doesn't seem particularly put off by the offense either. She doesn't deny it or fight back. She accepts it and she doubles down. So here we catch the most important aspect of what Mark is saying. Throughout this whole section of stories, as Jesus is doing these things with the loaves of bread and the bread, and no one understands the meaning of the loaves. You remember when Jesus was walking on the water and they were all surprised because they didn't understand the miracle of the loaves? I mean, just a few verses back, Jesus was calling out to his disciples in frustration, "Are you so dull?" They have been witnessing these events firsthand, but they don't even know what they mean. And the surprising twist of this story is that the first person to understand is this Greek, Syrian, Phoenician, Gentile woman. She's not a disciple. She's not a religious leader. She's not a Pharisee. She's not even a Jew. She's a Gentile. She's never heard of Jesus until today. But now that she's heard of him, that's it. She gets it. And I think Mark is trying to point us here. All these people who are in don't get it. But she is an outsider of outsiders because she's a Gentile. This is a region across the lake. He's not in Israel. She is an outsider of outsiders because she is a woman, and she really has no grounds to come to Jesus. And we have to remember that in that time there was a strong sense of community. I mean, there still is in a lot of cultures in that part of the world, and the sense of community surrounded who was in and who was out. And it wasn't just the Jews who thought that way. It was just kind of the way it was. And she understood that to Jesus, she was an outsider. And she understands that she has no grounds whatsoever on which to ask his help or favor. She can't come and say, "Look at me, I'm a good Jewish woman who goes to the synagogue and does these things." No. She is an outsider. She has no grounds on which to come. But she comes. And Jesus points this out. She isn't part of the family. Is it right for him to take what belongs to the children and throw it to the dogs? Now, we bristle at people being called dogs. And it actually was not uncommon for Jews to refer to their neighbors as dogs. And the point is clear, though. She doesn't belong at the table. She's an outsider. And what he has is brought for the family, the insiders. Right? And the Bible talks about that, right? Paul talks about that the gospel is the power of God for salvation, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. So Jesus come for the Jews. He's the Jewish Messiah. He's here for those who are in. They're in God's chosen people. And she does not try to set herself up as an insider. Instead, she seeks his mercy by offering a witty response, which demonstrates her understanding of the situation. She says, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." She is content to identify with the dogs as long as she can come to Jesus. And she understands the meaning of the loaves because she's willing to take crumbs. The disciples, they aren't even convinced that 5 loaves is enough to feed 5,000, right? And Jesus does this. The Pharisees are concerned with how you eat, how you wash your hands before you eat. This woman is content with the crumbs, and she is not going to back down from her request. So she's a lot like the woman that we saw earlier who came through the crowd to touch the hem of Jesus' robe, thinking, if I can just touch the hem of his robe, I can be healed. These women have something in common. What these women have in common is that they are desperate and they are humble. They know that they have nothing to bring. They know that they are nothing of worth to be asking God for favors. They have nothing to offer. They are nobodies. They're nobodies in the Jewish society. They're nobodies in God's eyes. But yet, they come to him knowing that he is their only hope. And they're going to do whatever it takes to get his help. And because of her persistence and because of her wise answer, Jesus grants her request. So what is Mark showing us? Often it's those who are desperate who really understand Jesus. And stumbling blocks are not going to stop these people. They know that they're desperate. They know that they're in need, and they're going to come to Jesus, and they're not going to let go until he blesses them. And it reminds us of the parable that Jesus told of the persistent widow who constantly demanded justice from the corrupt judge, and she kept demanding it until he finally said, okay, fine, I'll do it, just so you leave me alone. We kind of remember that these women are persistent. They know that Jesus is the answer, that he is the hope. They're not worthy. There's nothing they can bring, but to touch the hem of his robe or to gather a scrap that falls to the floor will be enough. Are we desperate like that for God? Mark has made this point repeatedly. Jesus is for everyone, even for those that his followers would reject. But these people, they have to want him. They have to come. Because who he is a stumbling block. They say that the cross of Christ is a stumbling block both to the Jews and to the Gentiles. Jesus is a stumbling block. But those who are not offended by him have the right to come and drink freely from the waters of life. There's enough to go around. Even the crumbs are enough for us. God bless you.